Silas drove his knife into the dry creek bed, cutting loose the tangled wire while sweat stung his eyes. A rusted bullet scar pulled tight across his ribs, a quiet reminder of what mercy had cost him before. The brass trade coin near his boot bore the Twin Hawk seal of the Chiricahua war parties, meaning the entire valley was already locked down. Then the brush parted, and Nita collapsed against the sage, an arrow buried deep in her shoulder, her breath shallow and ragged. He could leave her to the dust and keep his own head, or shoulder the weight of her survival. Whatever he decided before the hoofbeats crested the ridge would either end his life or change the frontier forever. Before we ride on, if this quiet courage has you locked in, drop a like. Subscribe if you're with him. The canyon ahead doesn't forgive, and the burden he's carrying, it's about to change everything. Stay with me. The wire sang as the blade bit through it. Silas wiped grit from his brow, the dry canyon wind scraping his boots across cracked earth. He didn't hear her at first, only the low rattle of breath against stone. He pushed past the split cedar posts, and the sagebrush parted like a torn curtain. She lay curled against the roots, one arm pinned beneath her, a fletched arrow jutting dark from her shoulder. Dust clung to her lips. Her eyes were open, fixed on the pale sky. He dropped to one knee, the leather of his coat creaking. He didn't speak. He reached for the arrow shaft, tested the angle, and braced his forearm against her collarbone. She flinched. A low sound escaped her throat, more warning than plea. He pulled. The wood came free with a wet tear. Blood followed, thick and immediate. He pressed his bandana to the wound, feeling the frantic drum of her pulse against his palm. The sky held its breath. He worked the cloth tight, fingers steady, eyes scanning the ridge. Nothing moved, only the wind and the distant cry of a hawk. Then his boot struck metal. He glanced down. A brass trade coin rested in the dirt, half buried in the dust. He picked it up. The metal was warm. Twin hawks stamped into the surface, wings spread in a circle of woven grass. His jaw tightened. He knew that mark, not a war token, a healer's seal. The kind carried by those who walked between hostile camps, who traded salve for silence, who kept the fragile peace alive when rifles spoke louder than reason. He looked back at her face. The fear in her eyes hadn't faded, it had deepened. She wasn't running from a stray skirmish. She was running from men who wanted the border burned clean. The territorial marshal had made the warning clear enough last week at the general store. Keep your hands clean. Let the territory sort itself. The valley had seen too much fire already. Too many good men buried for bad reasons. But mercy had a way of echoing. He felt the old bullet scar pull tight across his ribs, a cold reminder of the night he'd chosen to walk past a bleeding stranger. He hadn't slept through the winter since. He slid his canteen to his free hand, uncorked it, and tilted it to her cracked lips. She drank, her eyes never left his. "You're out of the brush now," he said quietly. The words felt heavy, final. He gathered her weight against his chest, ignoring the sharp pull of old injuries, and stood. The valley below was still, too still. The air tasted of copper and dry pine. Every shadow stretched longer, pointing toward the settlement he had sworn never to approach again. He remembered the rusted iron taste of regret, how it lingered long after the guns cooled down the trail. This time he would carry the weight. Somewhere beyond the mesa, hoofbeats would soon beat the dry earth. He adjusted his grip, felt the brass coin press against his thigh, and turned toward the shadowed trail. He had crossed a line. There was no stepping back. The dust would settle over his footprints before nightfall, but the choice he'd just made would outlast them both. The wagon tracks cut shallow grooves into the hardpan. Silas kept the reins loose, letting the mare settle into a slow, deliberate stride. The dust hung thick in the afternoon heat, tasting of crushed sage and old smoke. He didn't look back at the brush. He didn't need to. The weight in the wagon bed told him everything. Nita lay still against the canvas, her breathing shallow but steady. The bandana held, soaked through at the edges. Her skin had lost that grayish cast. A faint warmth returned to her hands. He adjusted the blanket, feeling the rough wool catch on his calloused fingers. The brass coin rested against his thigh, heavy and warm. It didn't belong to him. It belonged to the land, and the land was watching. He followed the trail toward the settlement. The wooden posts of the fence line appeared first, bleached by sun and wind. Then the low roofs of the mercantile, the blacksmith's lean-to, the saloon's warped porch steps. The place sat quiet in the heat. No children ran in the dirt. No wagons rolled through the main drag. Only the slow creak of a weathered sign swinging on a rusted hinge. He pulled the mare to a stop near the water trough. The wood was cracked. The iron bands held. A few inches of muddy water sloshed at the bottom. He swung down, boots hitting hard earth. He didn't tie the horse. He left it breathing in the shade of the porch. He walked toward the general store. The bell above the door hadn't been oiled in months. It rang dull and flat. The interior smelled of coffee grounds, cured leather, and dry flour. Marshal Vance stood near the counter, polishing a brass button with a rag. He wore a faded blue coat, too heavy for the season. His hat sat low over his eyes. Two other men stood near the dry goods shelf. One wore a buckskin jacket frayed at the cuffs. The other carried a Winchester slung over his shoulder, barrel resting against his hip. They turned as Silas entered. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He didn't remove his hat. He didn't sit. "Silas," the marshal said, voice flat, measured. "Heard you were out near the dry creek." "I was," Silas replied. "Found anything worth reporting?" "Found a trail, found a woman." The buckskin man shifted his weight. The rifle barrel tilted slightly. Vance stopped polishing the button. He set the rag down. His eyes lifted, slow and deliberate. "What kind of woman?" "Apache." The word landed like a stone in still water. The saloon keeper across the street paused in sweeping his porch. A dog lifted its head from the shade of a wagon wheel. The air inside the store grew thick, heavy with unspoken history. Vance didn't blink. He didn't reach for his holster. He just watched Silas, reading the lines on his face, the set of his jaw, the dust on his boots. "Where is she now?" Vance asked. "In my wagon, behind the trough." The buckskin man exhaled sharply. "You brought her here." "I brought her to water, to shade." Vance stepped around the counter. His boots made no sound on the pine floor. He stopped 2 paces from Silas, close enough to smell the sweat and gun oil on his coat. "You know what happens when the territorial cavalry gets wind of this. I know what they do to anyone caught harboring an Apache. Not just harboring, aiding, supplying, crossing lines they drew in blood." Vance's voice dropped low and steady. "There's a bounty on her head, Silas, not from the army, from the ranchers, from the freighters, from the men who lost sons to the last raid. They don't want a trial, they want a rope. They want a warning posted on every trail north of the mesa." Silas didn't move. He kept his hands at his sides. He felt the old scar pull tight across his ribs, a cold ache, familiar, predictable. He remembered the winter of '74, the blizzard that buried 3 miles of trail, the stranger he'd left behind in a snow-choked cabin. The silence that followed, the nights he'd stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl through the cracks, knowing he'd chosen comfort over conscience. He hadn't slept through a cold season since. "She's bleeding," Silas said. "She's Apache," the rifleman replied. "She's breathing." Vance stepped closer. "You think mercy changes the math. You think the territory cares about your code. The law says she's contraband. The settlers say she's a threat. The cavalry says she's a scout. You take her in, you take a target on your back. You turn your back on her, you keep your homestead. You keep your name clean. You keep living." Silas looked past him, through the window. The wagon sat in the dust. The canvas shifted slightly with her breath. The mare stamped a hoof. The brass coin pressed against his leg. He felt the weight of it, not metal, memory, promise. He thought of the twin hawks, the woven grass, the healer's seal. He thought of the men who would ride past her body without stopping, the men who would call it justice, the men who would sleep soundly after. He turned back to Vance. She's not contraband. Vance's jaw tightened. She's not yours to judge. She's not yours to hang. The silence stretched, thick, heavy. The buckskin man shifted his grip on the Winchester. The rifleman's thumb rested on the hammer. Vance didn't flinch. He just watched Silas measuring the distance between words and bullets, between law and honor, between fear and duty. "Last chance," Vance said quietly. "Walk away. Leave her at the edge of town. Let the marshal's deputy handle it. Keep your head down. Keep your land. Keep your life." Silas didn't answer. He stepped past him, past the counter, past the dry goods. The bell rang again, dull and flat. He walked out into the heat. The dust rose around his boots. He didn't hurry. He moved with deliberate weight, each step grounded, each breath measured. He reached the wagon. He pulled the canvas back. Nita's eyes were open, watching him, not pleading, not trusting, just seeing. He nodded once. He checked the bandana, tight, dry at the edges. He gathered the spare blankets, the canteen, the rifle sling. He secured her against the wood. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He took the reins. He turned the mare away from the settlement, away from the trough, away from the fence line. The wheels groaned. The dust cloud rose. He didn't look back. The trail behind him stretched long and empty. The settlement faded into the heat haze. The voices of the townsmen didn't follow. They didn't need to. Their warning had already settled into his bones. He knew what they would say when the cavalry rode in. They would call him a traitor. They would call him a fool. They would call him a dead man. He let them. He kept the reins loose. He kept his shoulders straight. He felt the old scar ache. It didn't stop him. It never had. It only reminded him why he couldn't turn back. The road narrowed. The trees thinned. The earth turned red and cracked. He followed the dry wash, keeping the wagon low in the brush. He avoided the open flats. He avoided the ridges. He moved where the shadows fell longest. He watched the sky. The sun dipped low, casting long fingers across the canyon floor. The air cooled slightly. The wind shifted. It carried the scent of pine and distant rain. He didn't trust it. He trusted the dirt, the tracks, the silence. He knew the territory hunters would be out by nightfall. He knew they'd follow the wagon tracks. He knew they'd bring rifles. He knew they wouldn't ask questions. He kept moving. The wagon hit a rut. The wheel jolted. Nita gasped. Her hand curled against the canvas. He pulled the mare to a stop. He stepped down. He checked the axle, checked the straps, checked her face. Her skin was pale, her lips parted slightly. He uncorked the canteen, tilted it. She drank, slow, careful. He wiped the water from her chin. He didn't linger. He didn't hesitate. He climbed back up. He took the reins. He pushed the mare forward. The wheels turned. The dust settled. The trail disappeared behind them. He was out of the valley, out of reach, out of safety. He didn't know what waited ahead. He only knew what waited behind, and he wouldn't turn back for it. The first warning marker appeared near dusk. 3 stones stacked in a triangle. A strip of faded leather tied to a low branch. The leather curled in the wind. Dry. Brittle. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant. Boundary. Warning. Turn back. He adjusted his course. He followed the wash deeper into the brush. The trees grew denser. The earth grew softer. The shadows stretched longer. He kept his eyes on the ground, watching for tracks. Watching for signs. Watching for men. He found none. Only the wind, only the dust, only the weight of his own breathing. He didn't stop. He didn't rest. He pushed forward. The sky darkened. The stars appeared, cold, distant, unmoved. He kept going. The mesa country didn't welcome him. It tested him. The trail fractured into narrow cuts, half swallowed by sage and dry thorn. The wagon wheels sank into loose scree, grinding against stone. Silas kept his hands tight on the reins, feeling every shift in the mare's weight, every hesitation in her stride. She knew the ground. She knew the danger. He trusted her more than he trusted his own eyes. He kept the pace slow, deliberate. The water in the canteen sloshed lightly with each jolt. He counted the sips. Half gone, then a third, then a quarter. He didn't ration it for himself. He rationed it for her. He didn't drink unless his throat cracked. He didn't complain, he just kept moving. The warning markers multiplied. A line of white stones arranged in a half circle, a strip of buckskin nailed to a dead pine, a shallow trench dug across the trail filled with ash and broken glass. He recognized them, Apache territory markers, not war signs, boundary signs, a quiet warning. You are being watched. You are being measured. You are being allowed to pass but not forgiven. He didn't break stride. He didn't speed up. He kept the wagon centered in the dry wash where the earth held firm and the shadows stayed deep. He watched the ridgeline. He watched the brush. He listened. Only the wind answered. Only the mare's breath. Only the creak of leather and wood. Night fell heavy and sudden. The temperature dropped. The air grew sharp. Silas pulled the wagon beneath a cluster of juniper trees where the branches formed a low canopy against the chill. He didn't light a fire. Fire meant smoke. Smoke meant eyes. He secured the mare to a sturdy trunk. He checked the harness. He checked the wheel spokes. He checked Nita. Her breathing had steadied. The bandana held dry. Her skin had lost the gray pallor. A faint color returned to her cheeks. He knelt beside the wagon bed. He didn't speak. He placed a fresh blanket over her shoulders. He adjusted the canteen within reach. He sat back on his heels. The night pressed in, cold, quiet, heavy with unseen weight. He heard them before he saw them, hoofbeats. Distant at first. Muffled by distance and rock. Then closer. Rhythm steady. Pace controlled, not a single rider. A patrol, 3, maybe 4, moving along the ridge above the wash. Silas didn't move. He kept his hand near his rifle but didn't draw it. He kept his breathing shallow. He let the night do the work. The hoofbeats passed, slowed, stopped. A horse snorted. A man's voice murmured, low and indistinct. Then the hoofbeats resumed, fading into the dark. Silas didn't exhale until the sound vanished completely. He stayed still, listening, waiting. The cold seeped through his coat, his fingers stiffened. He didn't shift. He didn't adjust his position. He let the night settle around him like a heavy blanket. He knew they'd be back. He knew they'd follow the trail. He knew they'd track the wagon wheels. He knew they wouldn't stop at the boundary. He knew they'd cross it. He rose before dawn. The sky lightened slowly, painting the eastern ridge in pale gold and bruised purple. The air smelled of frost and dry earth. He checked the mare, checked the harness, checked the wagon. He packed the spare blankets. He secured the canteen. He didn't drink. He offered it to Nita. She took 3 sips, closed her eyes, rested. He climbed into the seat. He took the reins. He turned the wagon toward the deeper cuts in the mesa. The trail narrowed. The walls closed in. The light filtered through the stone in thin, slanted beams. He moved carefully, watching the ground, watching the ridges, watching for signs. He found them quickly. Fresh boot prints in the dust. Narrow, heeled, military issue. Cavalry. 2 days old, maybe 3, but moving fast, following the same wash. He didn't panic, he adjusted. He kept the wagon low. He followed the dry creek bed where the rocks sheltered the wheels from view. He avoided the open flats. He avoided the high trails. He stayed in the shadows. He kept moving. The water ran out by midday. The canteen tipped empty. Silas didn't curse. He didn't hesitate. He tied it to the seat. He kept his focus forward. The mare's ears pinned back. Her stride shortened. Her coat darkened with sweat. He didn't push her. He walked beside the wagon, holding the reins, matching her pace. The dust coated his boots, crusted his lips, settled into the lines of his face. He didn't wipe it away. He let it settle. He let it weigh on him. He felt the old scar pull tight. Not from cold now, from hunger, from thirst, from the slow, steady burn of exhaustion. He didn't stop. He couldn't. The trail ahead curved around a basalt outcrop. Beyond it, the land dropped into a narrow gorge. He knew the gorge. He'd ridden it years ago, before the raids, before the bounty, before the lines were drawn in blood. He remembered the water hole at the bottom, shallow, brackish, but there. He pushed toward it. The gorge walls rose steep on either side. Smooth stone carved by centuries of flash floods, the air grew still, heavy. The temperature climbed. The mare's breathing grew ragged. Silas kept walking, one step, then another. His boots dragged through the loose gravel. His shoulders ached. His hands cramped around the reins. He didn't complain. He didn't look back. Kept his eyes on the trail, on the shadowed curve ahead, on the promise of water. He reached the bend. The path opened. The gorge floor lay before him, dry, cracked, empty. The water hole was gone, replaced by a wide, shallow depression filled with dust and dead reeds. Silas stopped. He didn't curse. He didn't drop to his knees. He just stood, still, quiet, measuring the distance between hope and reality. The mare lowered her head, snorted, shifted her weight. She knew. He knew. There was no turning back. There was no resting. There was only the trail ahead and the men behind it. He climbed back into the seat. He took the reins. He turned the wagon toward the deeper gorge. The stone walls closed in. The light dimmed. The air grew cool. He didn't check his watch. He didn't count the miles. He followed the dry creek bed where the earth held firm and the shadows stayed long. He listened. Only the wind, only the mare's breath, only the creak of wood and leather. He knew the patrol would find the dry water hole. He knew they'd read the tracks. He knew they'd push forward. He knew they wouldn't stop at the boundary. He knew they'd cross it. He kept moving. The sun dipped behind the western ridge. The sky darkened. The temperature dropped. The cold returned, sharp, unforgiving. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. He kept his hands on the reins. He kept his eyes on the trail. He didn't sleep. He didn't rest. He pushed forward. The second warning appeared near midnight. A single stone placed on a flat rock. No leather, no ash. No broken glass, just a stone, smooth, round, deliberate. Silas pulled the mare to a stop. He stepped down. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant. You are close. You are expected. Turn back or face the judgment. He looked up at the ridge. The stars shone cold and distant. The wind shifted. It carried a new sound, low, steady, rhythmic, hoofbeats, not distant now, close, echoing off the stone walls, bouncing back in fractured waves. He counted them, 4, maybe 5, moving fast. Cutting across the gorge floor, flanking him, he didn't panic, he didn't run. He climbed back into the wagon. He secured the reins. He checked the rifle, loaded, ready. He didn't cock the hammer. He didn't draw it. He just kept it within reach. He let the night do the work. He let the stone walls hide him. He let the shadows swallow the wagon. He waited. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. The men didn't call out. They didn't light lanterns. They moved silent, professional, territorial scouts, paid to track, paid to hunt, paid to collect. Silas kept his breathing steady. He kept his hands still. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. He knew he couldn't outrun them. He knew he couldn't outfight them. He knew he could only outlast them. He knew the gorge narrowed ahead. He knew the trail turned sharp. He knew the stone walls would force them into a single file. He knew he had one chance. He waited. The hoofbeats echoed, bounced, grew louder, grew closer. The mare shifted, snorted, stepped forward. Silas didn't stop her. He let her move. He kept his hands loose. He kept his eyes forward. The trail curved. The stone walls closed in. The shadows deepened. The hoofbeats filled the gorge, steady, relentless, unstoppable. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't brace. He just rode into the dark, into the narrow cut, into the line he'd drawn in dust and blood. He knew what waited beyond it. He knew what waited behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't slow down. He pushed forward. The wheels turned. The dust settled. The hoofbeats followed. He had crossed the boundary. There was no stepping back. The night would swallow his tracks, but the choice he'd made would outlast the desert. The blade never fell, but the silence that followed carried more weight than steel. Silas thought he'd passed the test. He hasn't, because what steps out of the tree line in the next few minutes isn't another warrior. It's a burden wrapped in oilcloth and dust, one that will force him to decide whether to ride for his own life or carry a truth that could ignite the entire territory. If that quiet courage has you locked in, hit the like button now and tell me in the comments what you would have done in his boots. Subscribe if you haven't, because when the war party finally returns what they've been guarding, you won't see how it flips the balance of power. Stay with me. The ground is about to shift. The rope bit into his wrists before he heard the footfalls. Dust plumed from the dry wash. Shadows detached from the stone wall. 3 men, maybe 4, no shouts, no warning shots, just efficient movement, boots finding purchase on loose scree, hands moving with practiced silence. Silas didn't reach for his rifle. He let it hang in its sling. He let his hands stay visible. He dropped to one knee as the first man stepped from the brush, then the second, then the third. The third man carried no weapon. He carried a length of braided rawhide. He moved behind Silas. The leather tightened. Quick. Firm, unyielding. Silas didn't fight it. He felt the pull across his shoulders. He felt his center of gravity shift. Then the shove came. Knees struck hardpan. Grit scraped through his trousers. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a short, controlled exhale. He kept his head up. He kept his breathing steady. He didn't look at the ground. He looked forward. The war leader stepped out from the juniper shade. He moved like a man who knew every stone in the canyon. Boots worn thin at the heel. A faded wool coat patched at the elbows with faded calico. A wide-brimmed hat pulled low, casting a hard line of shadow across his eyes. His face was carved by sun and wind, lined deep at the corners, marked by a lifetime of hard winters and harder choices. He carried no rifle. Only a long hunting knife, drawn slow from a leather sheath at his hip. The steel caught the pale morning light. Cold, clean, unadorned, he didn't rush. He didn't posture. He simply walked forward until he stood a pace from Silas's knees. The wind lifted dust around his boots. The canyon held its breath. The blade came down, not fast, not slow, just deliberate. The flat of it pressed against Silas's jawline, cold metal against warm skin. The edge hovered near the throat, close enough to cut, close enough to test. The leader's eyes never left Silas's face. He watched the pulse at the neck. He watched the rise and fall of the chest. He watched for the tell, the flinch, the swallow, the break in the eyes. Silas didn't give it. He kept his gaze level. He kept his jaw relaxed. He let the steel rest where it wanted to rest. He didn't brace. He didn't lean away. He just breathed. In, out, even, controlled. The leader spoke first in Apache. The words rolled low and steady, carrying the weight of old grief and sharper vigilance. Then he switched to English, the syllables rough but clear. You cross the line. You carry our blood on your wagon. You bring her into the stone. Why? Silas didn't blink. He didn't shift his weight. He answered plainly, his voice quiet but carrying in the still air. She was bleeding. She needed water. I gave it. My word holds. No deceit. The knife didn't move. The leader's thumb traced the spine of the blade. His eyes dropped to Silas's hands, bound tight at the wrists, veins prominent. Knuckles scarred from years of harness work, fence mending, horse breaking. He looked for tremor. He looked for sweat. He looked for the quick, shallow breathing of a man measuring escape. He found none. Only the steady rhythm of a man who had already made his peace with the ground. The leader stepped closer. The steel shifted, just a fraction. It pressed slightly harder against the skin below the ear. A warning, a question, a measure of truth. Silas felt the old bullet scar pull tight across his ribs, a cold ache, familiar, predictable. He remembered the winter of '74, the snow that buried the trail, the stranger left in the cabin, the silence that followed. The nights he'd stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl through the cracks, knowing he'd chosen comfort over conscience. He hadn't slept through a cold season since. The memory didn't weaken him, it anchored him. He wouldn't repeat it, not here, not now, not with steel at his throat and dust in his lungs. He kept his eyes open, he kept his voice level. She deserved a chance to live. I didn't ask permission. I didn't wait for the law. I saw blood. I acted. If your blade ends it, let it. But the truth doesn't change with the cut. The wind shifted. It carried the scent of dry pine and distant sage. The canyon walls stood silent. The warriors behind the leader didn't move. Their hands rested near their weapons, but their eyes stayed on the man in the dust. They watched the leader. They waited for his judgment. The leader didn't rush. He studied Silas's face. He studied the set of his shoulders. He studied the absence of fear. He saw a man who carried weight without complaint, a man who spoke plainly without pleading, a man who stood at the edge of death and didn't flinch from it. He lowered the knife slowly. The steel cleared the skin. He stepped back. He nodded once to the warrior holding the rawhide. The rope loosened. Quick, efficient. The leather fell away from Silas's wrists. Blood rushed back into his hands. Fingers tingled. He didn't rub them. He didn't flex them. He just kept his posture straight. The leader sheathed the knife. The sound of leather swallowing steel echoed soft in the quiet wash. He spoke again, his voice lower now, carrying less edge and more weight. "Rise." Silas pushed himself up. Knees ached. Boots scraped against stone. He stood fully, brushing dust from his coat with one hand, the other resting loosely at his side. He didn't look down. He didn't look away. He met the leader's eyes. The man didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He just turned and began walking toward the deeper cut in the mesa. Two warriors fell in behind Silas, not to guard him, to guide him. The third stayed near the canyon mouth, watching the trail they'd come from. Silent, watchful, ready, Silas followed. He didn't speak. He matched the leader's pace, step for step, breath for breath. The trail narrowed. The stone walls closed in, casting long, cool shadows across the dry creek bed. The air grew still, heavy with unspoken history. He passed markers he hadn't seen before. A line of white stones arranged in a careful curve. A strip of faded buckskin tied to a low branch, fluttering in the wind. A shallow trench filled with ash and crushed quartz. He recognized them, not warnings of war, markers of passage, signs of a people moving through land they knew by heart. He kept his eyes forward. He kept his hands loose. He felt the brass coin still pressed against his thigh, warm through the fabric. It didn't feel like metal anymore. It felt like a bridge, and he was walking across it. The march continued for over an hour. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down. The dust coated his boots, his cuffs, his lips. He didn't ask for water. He didn't complain. He let the physical weight ground him. He focused on the rhythm of boots on stone, the quiet scuff of leather, the steady breath of the men around him. He thought of Nita. He wondered if she was alive. He wondered if she was safe. He pushed the doubt down. He let the present moment hold him. He had passed the blade. He hadn't passed the trial. The trial was just beginning. The terrain shifted. The canyon opened into a narrow basin, sheltered by high rock walls and thick stands of mesquite. The ground was softer here, dusted with pine needles and dry grass. The air felt cooler, the shadows deeper. The leader stopped at the edge of a low rise. He turned. He gestured with two fingers toward the basin floor. Silas looked down. The camp didn't announce itself. It revealed itself slowly. Faded canvas tents tucked beneath rock overhangs. Low brush shelters woven from willow and sage. A narrow smoke column rising from a carefully concealed fire pit. Women moved quietly between the structures, grinding corn, sorting dried meat, folding blankets. Children played near a shallow spring, their voices muffled, their eyes watchful. Horses stood tethered in the shade, coats dusted with trail dirt, ribs showing slightly beneath the hide. It wasn't a war camp. It was a people camp, temporary, camouflaged, held together by necessity and quiet discipline. The leader descended the rise. Silas followed. The two warriors stayed a few paces behind, their presence felt but not pressing. They moved through the outer edge of the settlement. No one stared. No one approached. They simply watched. Eyes tracking Silas's steps, measuring his posture, reading the dust on his coat, the calm in his face. He kept his gaze level. He didn't look down. He didn't look away. He let them see what he was, a man who had crossed a line, a man who hadn't run from it. He saw her near the center of the camp. Nita sat propped against a low stack of saddle blankets, her back resting on a wooden supply crate. Her shoulder was wrapped in clean linen, tied tight but not cutting into the skin. The gray pallor was gone. A faint color had returned to her cheeks. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes were open, clear, focused. They found him before he reached the fire. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she simply nodded, once. Slow, acknowledgement, not gratitude, not trust, just recognition. He returned the gesture. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't kneel, he didn't speak, he just stood. The leader stepped between them. He didn't look at Nita, he looked at Silas. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke and crushed juniper. The camp held its rhythm, quiet, deliberate, unrushed. The leader reached beneath a folded canvas near the supply crates. He pulled out a heavy bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. The fabric was dark with use, the corners frayed, the center thick with weight. He held it out, not to Nita, to Silas. The gesture was clear. The silence that followed was heavier. Silas didn't reach for it immediately. He looked at the bundle, he looked at the leader, he looked at Nita. She met his eyes. She gave the smallest shake of her head, not a warning, an invitation, a permission. He stepped forward, he took the bundle. It was heavier than it looked, dense, solid. The oilcloth smelled of pine resin and old paper. He didn't open it, not yet. He held it in both hands, feeling the weight settle into his palms, the corners pressing into his skin. The leader spoke again, his voice low, carrying across the quiet camp. She carried it when the raiders struck the supply trail. They wanted it burned. They wanted the valley blind. She ran, she bled, she kept it dry. You found her, you brought her through, now you hold it. What you do with it belongs to you, but know this. He paused, his eyes locked onto Silas's. They ride at dawn, cavalry, 2 companies, orders to clear the basin, orders to burn the camps, orders to leave no trace. The orders came from paper, from men in clean offices, from men who never felt the dust. The paper is a lie. The blood will be real. You can walk away. You can keep it hidden. You can live, or you can carry it back and try to stop a fire before it starts. Silas felt the words settle into his chest. Heavy, cold, unavoidable. He looked down at the bundle. He thought of the brass coin, the twin hawks, the healer's seal. He thought of the men who would ride past Nita's body without stopping. He thought of the cavalry moving on false intelligence, believing they were punishing raiders when they were actually clearing land for men who paid for blood. He thought of the marshal's warning, the town's fear, the law's blindness. He had crossed a line to save one life. Now the line had expanded. It stretched across the valley, across the camps, across the future of 2 sides who had been pushed into war by men who wanted the land without the people. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He just tightened his grip on the oilcloth. He felt the corners dig into his palms. He felt the weight of it. Not paper, truth, responsibility, consequence. The leader stepped back. He didn't offer more words. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. The camp held its rhythm. The fire crackled low. The wind shifted. It carried the scent of distant rain, or maybe just dust. Silas didn't know. He only knew what he held and what he would have to do with it. He turned toward the edge of the basin, toward the trail that led back to the gorge, toward the settlement, toward the cavalry, toward the men who would call him a traitor or a fool or a dead man. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. He started walking. The bundle pressed against his chest. The dust coated his boots. The sun dipped behind the western ridge. The shadows stretched long. The camp faded behind him. The trail ahead was empty. For now, he knew it wouldn't stay that way. He knew the cavalry would move fast. He knew the town would talk fast. He knew the law would act fast. He moved slower, deliberate, measured, grounded. He felt the old scar pull tight across his ribs. It didn't stop him. It never had. It only reminded him why he couldn't turn back. He had carried a wounded woman through the dust. Now he carried a ledger through the dark. The duty had changed. The weight had doubled. The choice hadn't. He would see it through, or he wouldn't see it at all. The basin faded behind him, swallowed by the rising stone and the deepening shadows. Silas walked with the bundle secured against his chest, the oilcloth damp with sweat and dust, the corners pressing firm into his ribs. He didn't run. He didn't hurry. He moved with the steady, measured pace of a man who knew the distance ahead and the weight he carried. The trail wound upward, cutting through narrow cuts in the mesa, where the rock walls rose steep on either side, casting the path in cool, slanted light. The air grew thinner, cooler. The scent of pine gave way to dry earth and crushed sage. He listened. Only the wind, only his boots on stone, only the quiet rustle of canvas against his coat. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The camp had already measured him. He had already measured himself. Now the trail would test him. He reached the ridge by late afternoon. The sun hung low, painting the western sky in bruised purple and faded gold. Below him, the valley stretched wide and open, dust-choked trails, isolated homesteads. The settlement sat near the center, a cluster of wooden roofs and weathered porches, quiet in the heat. Beyond it, the territorial road cut straight toward the military outpost. 2 days' ride for a cavalry company, maybe less if they pushed hard. He knew they wouldn't wait. The orders were already written. The men were already saddled. The paper trail was already burning. He looked down at the bundle in his hands. He didn't open it, not yet. He knew what was inside. He knew whose names were written. He knew what would happen if he failed to deliver it. He also knew what would happen if he succeeded. Neither path promised safety, only consequence. He descended the ridge, following a game trail that paralleled the main road, staying low in the brush, avoiding the open flats. The mare wasn't with him. He'd left her secured near a dry wash, knowing she couldn't make the steep climb. He walked. He let the physical effort ground him. He let the dust settle into his boots, his cuffs, his face. He didn't wipe it away. He let it weigh on him. He felt the old scar pull tight across his ribs, not from cold now, from anticipation. From the slow, steady burn of a decision already made. He had crossed a line to save one life. Now he would cross it again to save many. The math didn't change, only the scale. He made camp beneath a cluster of juniper trees as dusk settled over the mesa. He didn't light a fire. Fire meant smoke. Smoke meant eyes. He secured his rifle within reach. He laid out a spare blanket. He sat against the trunk, the oilcloth bundle resting on his knees. The sky darkened. The stars appeared, cold, distant, unmoved. He finally opened the bundle. The oilcloth fell back. Beneath it lay a leather-bound ledger thick with pages, the cover worn smooth from handling, the spine reinforced with stitched twine. A wax seal held the front cover shut, stamped with a territorial surveyor's mark. He broke the seal with his thumb. The wax cracked. The cover opened. The first page was a list. Names, dates, payments, shipments, land parcels. The handwriting was precise, official, unmistakable. He recognized 3 names immediately. The freight company owner who supplied the settlement. The territorial land agent who had pushed for Apache removal. The deputy marshal who had warned him to walk away. Beside each name, a series of entries. Bribes paid, false reports filed, supply trails sabotaged, raiders hired to stage attacks, payments routed through shell accounts, land titles pre-signed, all of it documented, all of it dated, all of it leading to one conclusion. The recent raids hadn't come from the Apache, they'd been manufactured. Funded by men who wanted the valley cleared, the territory pacified, the land cheap. The cavalry wasn't riding to punish raiders, they were riding to finish a job. Silas traced the lines with his thumb. The ink was dark, the paper heavy, the truth undeniable. He turned the page. More entries, more names, more payments, more dates. He saw the pattern, clear, deliberate, ruthless. He closed the ledger. He pressed the cover shut. He wrapped it back in the oilcloth. He secured the bundle. He didn't curse. He didn't swear. He just sat in the dark, feeling the weight of it settle into his chest, into his hands, into his bones. He thought of the leader's words. They ride at dawn. Orders to clear the basin. Orders to burn the camps. Orders to leave no trace. He thought of the townsmen's warning. Keep your head down. Keep your land. Keep your life. He thought of the winter of '74, the stranger left behind, the silence that followed. He wouldn't repeat it, not now, not ever. He slept in short, fractured intervals. The cold pressed down, the wind shifted, the shadows stretched. He woke before dawn. The sky lightened slowly, painting the eastern ridge in pale gold and bruised purple. The air smelled of frost and dry earth. He packed the ledger carefully into his coat, securing it against his chest beneath the old bullet scar. He checked his rifle, loaded, ready. He didn't cock the hammer, he didn't draw it, he just kept it within reach. He stood. He brushed dust from his coat. He adjusted his hat. He turned toward the trail. He began walking. The road to the settlement stretched long and empty. He stayed low in the brush, moving parallel to the main drag, watching for signs of movement, listening for hoofbeats, feeling the ground for vibration. The dust coated his boots, crusted his lips, settled into the lines of his face. He didn't complain, he didn't hurry, he pushed forward. The settlement appeared through the morning haze. Wooden posts, bleached roofs, warped porch steps, quiet, too quiet, he knew why. The cavalry would ride through today, the town would prepare, the men would arm themselves, the women would lock their doors, the children would stay inside. The fear was already in the air, thick, heavy, unspoken. He reached the edge of town by mid-morning. He didn't enter through the main drag. He approached from the north, cutting through the dry wash, staying beneath the tree line, using the shadows to cover his movement. He saw the territorial scouts first, 2 of them, mounted, patrolling the ridge above the settlement, rifles slung, hats pulled low, watching, waiting. He didn't flinch, he didn't speed up, he kept moving. He reached the rear of the blacksmith's lean-to. He slipped through the narrow gap between the building and the fence line. He stepped into the alley, he stood still, he listened. Only the wind, only the distant creak of a wagon wheel, only the quiet hum of a town holding its breath. He moved toward the marshal's office. The wooden steps groaned under his weight. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open. The interior smelled of coffee grounds, cured leather, and dry paper. Marshal Vance stood near the counter, polishing a brass button with a rag. He wore the same faded blue coat, the same low hat. He didn't look up immediately, he just kept polishing. The rhythm steady, measured, deliberate. "Silas," Vance said, voice flat, measured. "Heard you were out near the dry creek." "Yes." "I was," Silas replied. "Found anything worth reporting?" "Found a trail, found a woman, found a lie." Vance stopped polishing. He set the rag down, his eyes lifted, slow and deliberate. "What kind of lie?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He reached into his coat. He pulled out the ledger. He placed it on the counter. The leather thudded against the pine. The wax seal cracked. The cover fell open. Vance didn't touch it. He just looked at it. He looked at the names. He looked at the dates. He looked at the payments. His jaw tightened. His hands stilled. The room grew quiet, thick, heavy, with unspoken history, with unspoken fear, with unspoken truth. "You brought this here," Vance said quietly. "I brought it to you. You know what it means." "I know what it stops." "Yes." Vance stepped closer. He looked at the ledger. He looked at Silas. He measured the distance between words and bullets, between law and honor, between fear and duty. "They ride at noon," Vance said. "2 companies. Orders are signed. The governor knows. The freight men know. The deputy knows. You put this on my desk. You put a target on my back. You put a target on your back. You put a target on this town." Silas didn't flinch. He didn't look away. "They ride on a lie. You let them ride, you bury the valley. You stop them, you break the law. Choose which side of the grave you want to stand on." Vance didn't answer immediately. He stared at the ledger. He stared at the names. He stared at the truth he'd spent years avoiding. His hands trembled slightly, just once. Then he steadied them. He looked up. His eyes met Silas's. "What do you want me to do?" "Read it, believe it, act on it." Vance exhaled, slow, heavy, final. He reached for the ledger. He didn't close it. He opened it wider. He traced a name with his finger. He nodded once. "I'll stall them. I'll send word to the outpost. I'll hold the line, but they won't stop for long, not for paper, not for truth. They'll come anyway, you know that." "I know." "Then what's the point?" "The point is you'll be standing when they ride in. The point is you won't be looking away. The point is the valley gets a chance. That's all any of us can ask for." Vance didn't speak again. He just picked up the ledger. He carried it to his desk. He sat. He opened it. He began to read. Silas turned. He walked out of the office. He stepped into the alley. He moved back toward the dry wash. He didn't hurry. He didn't look back. He let the weight of it settle. He let the choice stand. He knew it wasn't over. He knew it would never be over, but it had begun, and that was enough. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down. The dust coated his boots. He kept walking. The trail stretched long. The shadows shifted. The canyon walls stood silent. He felt the old scar pull tight across his ribs. It didn't stop him. It never had. It only reminded him why he couldn't turn back. He had carried a wounded woman through the dust. He had carried a ledger through the dark. He had placed the truth on a desk that feared it. Now the valley would decide. The cavalry would decide. The town would decide. He wouldn't. He had done what he could. He would face what came. He kept moving. The dust settled. The wind shifted. The sky darkened. The ground held firm. He walked into the quiet, into the weight, into the consequence. He didn't look back. He didn't slow down. He pushed forward. The wheels of the law would turn. The truth would echo. The choice would ripple. And the frontier would remember, not the guns, not the dust, not the fear. The man who carried a burden he was told to drop, and refused. The trail to the homestead climbed out of the wash, cutting a narrow line through dry sage and weathered pine. Silas stood at the edge of the ridge, boots planted in the dust, eyes fixed on the distant smoke column that marked his cabin. The land looked familiar, solid, safe. The water trough was full. The woodpile was stacked. The porch steps were worn smooth by years of quiet mornings and long evenings. He could walk up that trail. He could close the door. He could let the valley burn. No one would blame him. The town had warned him. The law had ordered him. The cavalry was already riding. He had done his part. He had carried the wounded. He had crossed the boundary. He had delivered the truth. The rest was not his to hold. The wind shifted. It carried the scent of distant rain and dry earth. It also carried the low, steady rumble of hooves. 2 companies, maybe more. The sound rolled across the basin like distant thunder. Silas felt the old bullet scar pull tight across his ribs. A cold ache, familiar, predictable. He remembered the winter of '74. The cabin buried in snow. The stranger left on the porch. The silence that followed. He had told himself it was survival. He had told himself it was prudence. He had slept through the nights, but the quiet had never left him. It had settled into his bones. It had waited for this exact moment. He closed his eyes. He let the memory settle. He let the truth rise. Running now would not be survival. It would be repetition. It would be another winter. Another empty room. Another silence he would never outrun. He opened his eyes. He turned away from the ridge. He stepped toward the settlement. The main drag was already filling. Men gathered near the mercantile, near the saloon, near the blacksmith's lean-to. Rifles rested against shoulders. Shotguns sat in the crook of arms. Hands gripped leather straps and wooden stocks. Eyes darted toward the eastern road. Faces were tight, jawlines set. Fear moved through the crowd like a slow current. It didn't show in shouts. It showed in the silence, in the way men shifted their weight, in the way they avoided looking at each other. Silas walked into it. Boots hit the hard-packed dirt. Dust rose around his ankles. He didn't hurry. He didn't slow down. He moved with the same steady, measured pace he had kept on the trail, step for step, breath for breath. He passed the water trough. He passed the faded sign. He passed the porch steps where he had left his horse hours ago. The mare wasn't there. He hadn't brought her. He knew what waited ahead. He didn't need a quick escape. He needed a place to stand. He reached the center of the square. He stopped. The dust settled around his boots. The crowd noticed him. Heads turned. Eyes locked. Rifles shifted. A man near the post office stepped back. Another near the dry goods store adjusted his grip. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with the unspoken weight of what was coming and what was already here. Silas didn't raise his hands. He didn't reach for his holster. He just stood. Shoulders straight, hands loose at his sides, eyes fixed on the marshal's office. The door was open. The interior was dark. The desk sat near the window. The ledger lay on the pine, visible, heavy, unavoidable. Silas walked toward it. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The wood smelled of oil and old paper. He stepped onto the porch. He stopped at the threshold. He looked inside. Vance stood near the counter. His coat was unbuttoned. His hat sat on the desk. His face was pale. His hands rested on the ledger. He didn't look up immediately. He just traced the edge of the page with his thumb. The rhythm steady, measured, deliberate. "They're 2 miles out," Vance said quietly. "I know," Silas replied. "The freight men called them. The land agent signed the order." The deputy rode ahead to clear the trail. "They don't want a trial. They want a sweep." I read the pages. Vance finally looked up. His eyes were tired, heavy, carrying the weight of a man who had spent years looking away. "If I stand with you, I lose my badge. If I stand against them, I lose the town. If I step aside, I lose my soul." Silas didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer absolution. He just stepped inside. He stopped beside the desk. He placed his hand on the ledger. The leather was cool, the paper heavy, the truth undeniable. "They ride on a lie. You funded it with your silence. Now read it out loud, or watch the valley burn for a debt you didn't owe." Vance didn't move. The room held its breath. Outside, the crowd shifted. Footsteps approached. Boots on wood. The porch creaked. Men stepped onto the steps. Rifles leveled. Barrels caught the afternoon light. The sound of hammers clicking echoed in the quiet street. 1, then 2, then more. A loose circle formed, shoulders tight, fingers near triggers, eyes locked on Silas, on Vance, on the ledger. Fear had found its shape. It wasn't in the cavalry dust. It was in the square. In the men who had spent years blaming the Apache for raids they hadn't ordered. In the men who had spent years paying for peace they never questioned. In the men who now stood at the edge of a fire they had helped build. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He kept his hand on the ledger. He kept his voice level. "You can hang me for crossing the line. You can call me a traitor for carrying her through. You can let the cavalry ride and pretend the dust will wash the truth away. But when they burn the camps, you'll know whose names bought the matches. When they clear the basin, you'll know whose coins paid for the blood. Stand behind the desk. Read the pages. Or step aside and let the cavalry finish what your fear started." A man near the door spoke first, voice rough, tightly wound. "He's Apache touched. He brought her in. He's leading them right to us." Silas didn't turn. He kept his eyes on Vance. "I brought her in because she was bleeding. I carried the ledger because it was true. You can shoot me for it, but the cavalry won't stop for bullets. They'll ride through the square. They'll follow the orders. They'll leave the valley clean, and you'll live with the quiet after." The man's jaw tightened. His thumb rested on the hammer. Another man shifted his weight. A third adjusted his grip. The circle tightened. The air grew heavier. The dust settled. The distant rumble of hooves grew louder, closer, unstoppable. Silas felt the old scar pull tight across his ribs, not from cold, from certainty. He had made the choice. He wasn't waiting for permission. He wasn't looking for an escape. He was standing in the center of it. The weight of the ledger pressed into his palm. The weight of the town pressed into the room. The weight of the cavalry pressed into the street. He didn't brace. He didn't lean. He just stood, grounded, deliberate, unmoved. Vance exhaled, slow, heavy, final. He straightened his back. He unbuttoned his coat. He stepped around the desk. Stopped beside Silas. He looked at the men in the doorway, he looked at the rifles, he looked at the fear, then he looked at the ledger. He placed both hands on the cover, he opened it, the pages fell flat, the names stared back, the dates lined up. The payments traced a clear, deliberate path from greed to violence. Vance didn't raise his voice, he didn't plead, he just began to read. His words carried through the open door, through the square, through the dust. Names, amounts, dates, orders, signatures. The rhythm was steady, unhurried, unbroken. The men in the doorway listened. Their fingers eased off the hammers. Their shoulders dropped slightly. Their eyes shifted from Silas to the ledger, from fear to recognition, from silence to wait. The hooves reached the edge of the square. Dust plumed, horses snorted, leather creaked. The cavalry commander rode in first, coat buttoned, hat pulled low, eyes scanning the street. He saw the circle, he saw the rifles, he saw the marshal standing beside a dust-coated frontiersman. He saw the open ledger on the desk. He pulled his horse to a stop. He didn't speak immediately. He just watched. He measured the distance between orders and truth, between duty and consequence. He dismounted. He stepped onto the street. His boots hit hard dirt. He walked toward the porch. He stopped at the threshold. He looked at Vance. He looked at Silas. He looked at the ledger. "Orders are signed," the commander said, voice flat, measured. "The basin is marked for clearance. The camps are to be removed. The trail is to be secured." Yes. Vance didn't look up from the pages. The orders were bought. The raids were staged. The basin is clean. The camps are shelter. The trail belongs to men who never held a rifle in the dirt. Read the names. Check the payments. Call your governor or ride out. But don't clear a valley for a debt that was never yours to collect. The commander's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the ledger. He traced a line with his gloved finger. He recognized a freight company seal, a territorial surveyor mark, a deputy's signature. He stepped back. He didn't reach for his sidearm. He didn't call his men forward. He just stood still, quiet, measuring. The square held its breath. The dust settled. The wind shifted. The commander finally spoke. "I'll hold the companies. I'll send a rider to the outpost. I'll demand verification. If the paper checks out, we ride. If it doesn't, we turn back. But you know what happens if you're wrong." "I know what happens if you ride on a lie," Vance replied. The commander nodded once. He turned. He walked back to his horse. He mounted. He gave a quiet order. The companies pulled back. Hooves turned. Dust clouded. The rumble faded. The square exhaled. The rifles lowered. The circle broke. Men stepped back. Shoulders dropped. Eyes met. The tension didn't vanish. It fractured. It shifted. It left behind a quiet that felt heavier than fear. Silas removed his hand from the ledger. He stepped off the porch. He walked into the square. The dust coated his boots. The sun dipped behind the ridge. The shadows stretched long. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He had made the choice. He had paid the price. The rest would settle on its own. He turned toward the edge of town, toward the trail, toward the ridge, toward the quiet. He kept walking, step for step, breath for breath. The ground held firm. The sky darkened, the valley breathed. He had crossed the line. There was no stepping back, but there was finally peace to carry forward. The cavalry didn't return that week. They didn't return the next. The rider Vance sent reached the outpost, then the territorial capital, then the governor's office. The paper trail unraveled quickly under the weight of its own contradictions. Freight records were audited. Supply manifests were cross-checked. Deputy signatures were verified. The names in the ledger matched the names on the land deeds. The payments matched the bribes. The orders matched the raids. The truth didn't need a courtroom. It needed only to be seen. The governor suspended the sweep. The land agents were recalled. The freight company was investigated. The deputy resigned before the warrant arrived. The valley didn't erupt in celebration. It didn't need to. Justice in the frontier rarely came with fanfare. It came with quiet, with paused orders, with lowered rifles. With men who had spent years blaming the wrong people finally turning their eyes inward. The town didn't fracture into violence. It fractured into reckoning. Some packed their wagons and left. Some stayed and rebuilt their fences. Some walked to the mercantile, bought flour and coffee, and said nothing at all. The silence was different now. Lighter, clearer, less afraid. Silas didn't stay to watch it unfold. He knew how these things ended. The law always collected its toll. The authorities didn't care about the truth he'd delivered. They cared about the lines he'd crossed. The homestead was seized by territorial surveyors within 3 weeks. A quiet notice posted on the gate. A stamped seal on the door. No confrontation. No shouting. Just the slow, bureaucratic weight of a system correcting its own balance. Silas arrived on a Tuesday morning. The sky was pale, the air cool. The gate latch was already broken. He pushed it open. The yard was empty. The cabin stood quiet. The woodpile was gone. The water trough was dry. The porch steps were swept clean. He didn't curse. He didn't break the door. He just walked up to it. He placed his hand on the frame. The wood was smooth, worn by years of mornings and evenings. He remembered the winter of '74, the snow, the silence. The stranger left behind. He had carried that weight for decades. He wouldn't carry this one. He stepped inside. The room was bare. Dust settled on the floorboards. Sunlight cut through the window in thin, slanted beams. He found a single item on the hearth, a rusted iron nail, a piece of braided leather, a faded map of the canyon trails. He picked them up. He placed them in his saddlebag. He turned. He walked out. He closed the door behind him. He didn't lock it. He left it open to the wind. He saddled the mare near the dry wash. The animal was tired, thin but steady. She nuzzled his sleeve. He checked the straps. He secured the canteen. He didn't pack much: a spare blanket, a rifle sling, a coil of wire, a brass coin. He mounted. He turned the horse toward the ridge. He didn't look back at the cabin. He didn't look back at the settlement. He looked forward. The trail climbed. The dust rose. The sun climbed with him. The valley spread out below, quiet, open, changed. The Apache camps hadn't been burned. Trade resumed slowly along the old wash. Healers moved between ridges. Scouts walked familiar paths. Children played near the spring. The land didn't heal overnight. It didn't need to. It only needed to breathe. And for the first time in years, it did. He rode past the dry creek bed where he'd found her. The wire was still cut. The sage still stood. The brass coin rested in his pocket, warm against his thigh. He didn't need it anymore. He had already spent it. He rode past the boundary markers. The white stones, the faded leather, the ash-filled trench, they still stood, but the wind moved through them differently now. Less warning, more witness. He rode past the gorge where the patrol had tracked him. The stone walls still rose steep. The shadows still fell long, but the hoofbeats were gone. The fear was gone. The dust had settled. He kept moving. The trail narrowed. The trees thinned. The earth turned red and cracked. He didn't hurry. He didn't rush. He let the mare set the pace. He let the land speak through the rhythm of hooves on dirt. He felt the old scar pull tight across his ribs. Not from cold, from memory, from weight, from the quiet satisfaction of a promise kept. He hadn't saved the valley with a rifle. He hadn't saved it with a speech. He had saved it by refusing to walk away, by carrying a burden he was told to drop, by standing in the square when every instinct told him to run. The frontier didn't reward that kind of courage with gold. It rewarded it with time. With space. With the quiet knowledge that a single act of mercy could outlast a lifetime of violence. He reached the high country by late afternoon. The air grew thin, cool. The scent of pine replaced dry sage. The sky stretched wide and open. He pulled the mare to a stop beneath a cluster of juniper trees. He dismounted. He checked the harness. He loosened the saddle. He let the animal drink from a shallow spring. The water ran clear, cold. He didn't fill his canteen. He just knelt beside the edge. He washed the dust from his hands. He watched the water run over his knuckles. He felt the calluses, the scars, the years. He didn't regret the homestead. He didn't regret the ledger. He didn't regret the square. He regretted only the years he'd spent waiting for permission to do what was right. He stood. He brushed dirt from his coat. He adjusted his hat. He turned toward the ridge. The trail ahead was long, empty, unwritten. He knew what waited out there: more dust, more distance, more quiet mornings, more choices that would test him again. He was ready for it. He had learned the only law that mattered, the one that didn't require a badge, the one that didn't demand a title, the one that lived in the space between fear and honor, between running and standing, between survival and duty. He mounted. He took the reins. He pushed forward. The wheels of the valley would keep turning. The town would keep rebuilding. The camps would keep moving. The land would keep holding. And somewhere out there, men would still ride past a wounded stranger and tell themselves it was survival. But they would also remember the man who didn't. They would remember the ledger. The square, the quiet defiance. They would remember that mercy doesn't erase violence, it outlives it. He rode into the trees. The shadows swallowed him. The dust settled behind him. The trail disappeared, but the choice remained, carved into the dirt, held in the wind, echoing in the quiet. The frontier kept its secrets, but it never forgot its debts, and neither did he. If this story stayed with you, ride with us again. Subscribe and help keep these frontier tales alive for the next firelit night. Because out here, every name has a past, every trail has a cost, and every sunset still remembers. Until next time, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past and your heart pointed west.